Hello everyone, and welcome to a brand new episode of Traditionally Speaking. My name's Tom, and my good friend Joe and I are going to be discussing a really interesting topic this time. It's going to be the history of Santa Claus in the UK and in the US.
and otherwise known as Father Christmas in the UK. So, and which I've been called that here too in America. So I always know when somebody's come from Europe, when they're especially in the UK or Scotland or Ireland, when they call me Father Christmas.
Well, there's a long history behind Father Christmas and Santa, and that is because for many, many years, I mean, really from Tudor times up until sort of Victorian times, I suppose, Father Christmas was a predominantly English character, and he was quite different from Santa Claus in many ways because he didn't deliver presents. He didn't come down your chimney at night with a bag full of gifts for the family. Instead, he personified Christmas. He was there for feasting. He was there for goodwill. He was there for spreading joy. And he didn't have a red suit. He looked a bit like the ghost of Christmas Present in A Christmas Carol. He was a very Bacchanalian character and quite rowdy. But he didn't live in the North Pole. He was a very different character. But then, all of a sudden, in the 1840s, things change. There is a mention for the first time of Santa Claus in the John O'Groat Journal, which was a newspaper in the north of Scotland. And the journalist was amazed, all these kids saying there was this figure in a red suit that gave them presents, came down the chimney at night to leave presents. Not on Christmas Eve in Scotland as it happens, but on Hogmanay, which is New Year's Eve. So that's where that all came about. That's when Santa Claus and Father Christmas started to merge into the one character. And that, of course, became the figure in the red suit with the presents that we all know and love today.
And that actually is very true. I mean, even in Germany, where he was basically known as Pels Nickel, I mean, it was a different character, although he did bring, gifts and stuff. But primarily in the UK, you're absolutely right. He was tied in with the merriment of Christmas and the spirit of Christmas and that type of thing. And it was all through, like, before Christmas was all the holiday making and that kind of thing, that he would be around and, he'd bring in the Yule log and the wassail bowl and carry a cane and all of this stuff. That's where even our Santa today kind of carries a stamp. That's where it came from, was a blending of the two, Father Christmas and Santa Claus together.
Yeah, and of course you see things like that in the Albert Finney version of Scrooge, the one that was directed by Ronald Neame in 1970, yeah. Where there's lots of references to Father Christmas, but you can see Scrooge is wearing a Santa Claus outfit. So you can see that even then, that was set in 1860, brought forward from the sort of the early 1840s where the novella is set. But you can see there the merging of the two identities.
Yes, and certainly, as you mentioned, the Ghost of Christmas Present definitely looks like Santa Claus or Father Christmas, if you will, with the big robe and the hood and the carrying all the stuff and giving the blessings around to everywhere he went. So as, kind of like giving the gifts. So, yeah.
Isn't it a intriguing thing, though, that Father Christmas character in the form of the Ghost of Christmas Present, he's dressed in green, to symbolise the evergreen, coming of the new seasons and, the annual appearance, because, of course, he talks about having 1,930 odd brothers previous to him who had been, the Ghost of Christmas Present before he became the Ghost of Christmas Past.
Well, and most Americans don't know, but Santa only really wears red in America and now pretty much in the UK. But if you go to different countries, he's dressed very differently. He's dressed in greens and browns and tans. And if you go to Russia, it's Grandfather Frost and he's dressed in blue. So really the outfit is kind of geared more toward UK and the United States as far as Santa Claus. And of course, that's kind of where Thomas Nast came in during the 1860s when he was drawing Santa Claus. And he kind of developed the look of Santa we see today, which is, of course, based off of the Clement Clarke Moore's poem, A Visit from St. Nicholas. So, yeah. And that's where we kind of got ours. But what was interesting is the Dutch brought over Santa Claus to America. And it was Sinterklaas at that point in time. And even, back then, they started to develop the Santa Claus thing, and it started to get popular in places like New York and stuff. And then it went back to the UK. And before that, you were pretty much dressed, as you said, more like the old Father Christmas.
Yeah. Yeah.
And then,
because you mentioned Thomas Nast. I mean, when you see the early Santa Claus drawings after the Civil War, he is in a kind of a tan suit. It's not really until you get to the Haddon Sundblom illustrations for Coca-Cola in the 30s, see him in that amazing red fur suit that everybody now associates. And of course, you think of Miracle on 34th Street, the costume that was used there. Of course, everybody started to associate Santa with wearing that famous iconic red suit.
That's when the uniform kind of came into play of what to wear as Santa Claus. And we still have slight variations on that, but it still follows along those same traits. And you see that everywhere. And now you see it as much in Europe as you see it in America.
Yeah, because it was, when you mentioned Clement Clarke Moore, it was, of course, his poem that was to propagate the idea of Santa Claus over here, because fairly certain, of course, that when that first newspaper article appeared about Santa first giving gifts to kids in the 1840s, that it had been Clement Clarke Moore's poem that had inspired interest in the Santa Claus traditions over here, which is, of course, when Father Christmas started to meld into one tradition, so that everybody knew that Santa was going to be there for them at Christmas time, and that there were going to be gifts distributed. And of course, the reason in Scotland why it was in Hogmanay was because in Scotland it was banned. Christmas was banned until the 20th century because of historical reasons. So all of the Christmas traditions were superimposed onto Hogmanay for about 400 years until we get into the 20th century.
Yeah, you guys really have only been celebrating Christmas in Scotland for the last few decades. I mean, really, before that, you never did. And we were all, Santa was long since bringing gifts to us, long before you guys ever got on board. So it is interesting how different areas in Europe even developed at a later time. But yeah, obviously, the merging of Santa Claus with Father Christmas is now so universal. And you see a lot, like, for instance, when you guys have Santa parades and that kind, you'll see some with the long robes and the hood, and you'll see some in the traditional, as you mentioned, the sunbloom suits, like the Coca-Cola suit or the traditional Santa Claus suit with the white down the front. So yeah, it's really amazing how the two just kind of match together. And of course, you go back far enough, and the whole thing of Santa Claus started with St. Nicholas leaving gifts, to the poor and to helping people out. And that's where the tradition of stockings came from and stuff that, again, the Dutch brought over to us and just kind of spread from here and then went back across the sea to you.
Yeah.
Which is fascinating.
And it just goes to show that you can't keep Santa Claus down. He's an
absolutely.
Yeah, he's an international figure, and he's proud of it.
Yep, and he's been around, since 330 AD. I mean, when he passed away. But yeah, his his legacy and his legends have spread throughout the entire world. And again, in different countries, he's viewed differently sometimes, but still the primary character is right there and continues today. So, like, what's your biggest celebration with Santa Claus, or if you will, Father Christmas out there? What do you guys do?
Santa gets around over here. When we get into Christmas time, you'll find them in shopping malls. You'll find them switching on Christmas lights. And I would say, he's certainly got his work cut out for him in places like Edinburgh and London, Belfast and Cardiff. Where there'll always be big Christmas celebrations. Christmas markets are very popular over here in the European style, and you'll certainly see Santa there too. So he's someone who likes to get around.
You have a beautiful one in Sterling.
Oh, yes.
Big Christmas market in Sterling. I mean, boy, it'd be a dream for me to get there and see that sometime. But yeah, so pretty much the same thing we're doing in America, you're now doing over there. So it's amazing how much we have blended together and kept the same traditions. And of course, obviously, we still do shopping malls here. In fact, almost every retail store has a Santa at one point in time or another, and you'll even see them pop up in places you wouldn't expect them, like hardware stores and that kind of thing. And of course, we do a lot of the personal visits here. We do the parties. A lot of Christmas parties have Santa. I mean, I'm generally kept pretty busy from the end of October all the way into January. So, but it's kind of neat to see our traditions have kind of melded and blended. So, and speaking of traditions, please, folks, make sure you like and subscribe and hit that bell so you know when our next podcast is coming, because we're coming up with all kinds of fun, different things to talk about as far as traditionally speaking here. And you don't want to miss a thing on this, because you're going to learn some things that are really fascinating. So please join us for that. Now, we should ask our viewers, speaking of, what kind of traditions do they use Santa Claus for, other than putting them on your roof or putting them, on your front yard? How do you involve Santa in your Christmas traditions and your Christmas celebrations?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, have you met Santa in unusual places? Have you seen him at shopping malls or on holiday, or perhaps if you've been in a different country and you'd like to tell us all about the encounter that you had? Because one thing you can be sure about with Santa, he's full of surprises, and we'd love to hear your stories about.
Absolutely, yeah, and I'll bet you there's some good ones out there, and it's just kind of neat to see that something has continued on and on and on, and of course, my wife and I do a podcast behind the scenes with Santa and Mrs. Claus. So if you want to see some of the more interesting things that we've done as Santa and Mrs. Claus, we have all kinds of things, including, photo shoots at the Western White House and, different places we've been and being on Good Morning America, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So check us out at Behind the Scenes at Santa and Mrs. Claus, with Santa and Mrs. Claus. So thanks for that little commercial, Tom. But
yeah, and don't forget, if you would like to tell us a little bit about your own encounters with Santa, you can join us at traditionally-speaking.com and you can drop us a message and tell us a little bit about it.
And I'll tell you, this has been fun talking about it. And if you have more questions about the difference between Santa and Father Christmas, feel free to ask us. I mean, believe me, we've researched this a lot. We know a lot of the answers, and there's some interesting things like, did you know that Clement Clark Moore did not invent the reindeer with Santa Claus? That actually happened in a poem for children that happened several years before he published his poem. So, and we could tell you more about that.
Well, Santa's often to be seen here in Scotland because there is a free-roaming reindeer herd and up in Perthshire, and you can meet you can meet Santa there and talk to his reindeer. And I have to say, they're incredibly friendly.
Yes, they are. They're wonderful animals. I've met quite a few of them, as you can well imagine. So, well, this has been a lot of fun. I've enjoyed talking about this. So, yeah, if you have more interest on this subject, feel free to ask us, because we'd love to tell you more about it.
Yeah, well, thanks so much, Joe, for sharing your thoughts, because it's been, as always with these things, fascinating to look at all the differences and similarities between the UK and the US and all around the world.
And we appreciate you tuning in and learning about all these things. And boy, I'll tell you, we love our viewers, and thank you for any comments or any feedback that you give us. We'd love to hear more, and stay tuned with us. Remember, hit that subscribe button. So, well, Tom, this has been fun, but Santa's got to fly.
Well, absolutely.
Things to do.
Well, all around the world, right?
Yeah, I'll tell you, we're getting close now. Obviously, if you're looking at this, you're probably putting stuff out on your lawn already. So, with that, I'm going to say Merry Christmas to everybody, and it's time for me to get packing.
Well, thanks so much, Joe, for joining us today. It's been absolutely fantastic to speak to you. And thanks, everyone, for tuning in. I hope that you'll join us again soon for a brand new subject here at Traditionally Speaking.
You'll find it interesting, we promise. Thanks, everyone. Bye-bye.